2012 is a very special and significant year for Great Britain. It's the Queen's Diamond Jubilee, it's the 100th anniversary since the sinking of the Titanic, and London will also be hosting the 30th Olympic Games. But amid the excitement over the upcoming exporting extravaganza, it will pass many people by that it's also the 200th anniversary of author Charles Dickens' birth. Charles Dickens is one of the most celebrated authors in English literature, and he was born here in Portsmouth in 1812 to Elizabeth and John Dickens, the second of 8 children. Dickens wrote an astonishing 20 novels, none of which have since gone out of publication, including classics such as David Copperfield and A Christmas Carol, and his stories have also been adapted into plays, television series and films. In this programme, I will be looking at the bizarre way in which Dickens is represented in modern society, and we'll be visiting the potential Dickensian hotspots such as Dickens World and of course the Charles Dickens coffee shop in London. But first I came to Warwick University to get Dickens expert Professor John Mee's opinion on how he thinks the author is represented in modern times and whether or not the literary giant will be impressed about being Kent's equivalent to Harry Potter world.
That's a really interesting question. I think sometimes he's represented as a kind of window onto 19th century London, as though it was just simply the way things were, which is slightly strange given a lot of the writing's really kind of fantastic and has a lot of kind of gothic and dreamlike sequences. In fact, in some ways, what he was trying to say to his own world is like, look how strange your society is. So I think a lot of the recent stuff in the celebration of Dickens has tended to kind of assume that he's a kind of monument to the past, whereas ignoring the way that he was critical about the past and often had a kind of, let's say, perspective on it. You know, it doesn't just reflect what happened. It's an interesting issue. I mean, I think one thing to say is to be a bit pragmatic is he was quite interested in making money for his writing, and one of the things he was heavily involved in was actually campaigning about authors' copyright, making sure authors got a reward for their intellectual property. So I think the first thing to say is he'd be interested to know if he was going to get remunerated from it. But I think he would. He was somebody who was very worried about his own society's capacity for turning everything into a kind of commodity, something could be sold, to which human values would be sacrificed. So I think he would be worried about that, about the kind of commercialisation of his ideas. Even though in many ways he's a populist, I think he'd be worried in the idea it was just becoming a commodity. And secondly, he would want to make sure that people were not just consuming the image, that they were engaging with the writing and thinking about what the writing means. He wanted to be seen as somebody who contributed, I think, to the history of English literature, but more importantly than that, somebody who made people think about their position in society, about the meaning of what he wrote.
I've come to Dickens World in Kent, a theme park celebrating all of Charles Dickens' novels. A place where Oliver Twist is the equivalent of Mickey Mouse, and instead of the Brer Rabbit log flume ride, you get the Great Expectations water experience. But would Charles Dickens be jumping for joy that his literary works have become the equivalent of Alton Towers, or would he be dismayed that the legendary characters he created have become little more than photo opportunities for tourists? To coin a phrase, let's go and find out what the Dickens this is all about. My first impressions of Dickens World were that it was like stepping back into a modernised reincarnation of 19th century London, complete with robotic characters that act as a contradiction of how impoverished many of the people were during this period. The decor of the courtyard and fake shops looked authentic, but having a robotic man in a top hat attempting to shake hands with you certainly makes the place seem pretty ridiculous. The cobbled flooring of the main courtyard does hark back to the days when Queen Victoria ruled supreme over the country. But when a boat comes cascading down a log flume past you, you start to remember that in fact you're just in a small indoor theme park in the middle of Kent. I'm about to see some of the staff take part in a performance of Dickens' classic novel Oliver Twist. It's a silent play which does sound a bit unusual, but the crowd seem really excited by the thought of it. Let's see what it's like.
That would be kind. What's your name? Jack Cookies. But my friends call me the Artful Dodger. Come on.
Now I'm joined by Sean here, one of the performers at Dickens World. Sean, what do you think Charles Dickens would make of this place?
I think he would think it really does bring his stories to life, and I think he would enjoy seeing his works brought to life. Like we have, when we do the show of Oliver Twist in the courtyard, we have children that are dressed up in some of the costumes, and they really feel they're part of the story, so that really helps them. And I think Charles Dickens would enjoy seeing the pleasure that it brings to some of the children.
And do you think sort of this Dickens World has helped obviously Charles Dickens reach out to people and children in modern times?
I think it does, yes. It gives, especially children, gives them an interest from an early age, and then they can start discovering some of Dickens's works, which are, you know, brilliantly written and still relevant in nowadays, because they're all about family relationships, about people in reduced circumstances trying to better themselves, and I think that's a very positive thing, and I think that children could find that very beneficial. So I think Charles Dickens would be proud of that.
There are many areas of Dickens' world which the author would probably abhor, but one attraction which would appease Dickens is the Haunted Man section of the theme park, a place with plenty of creepy sound effects and eerie corridors.
Your cremation room, take heed.
Now, I'm about to go into the Great Expectations water ride here at Dickens World, one of the main attractions at the theme park. My day here has already been pretty bizarre, and it feels like it's getting even more surreal because I never expected to go on a water ride based on a Charles Dickens novel. Now, I've just finished my journey on the Great Expectations water ride, and I have to say I'm rather confused because it really has nothing to do with Great Expectations the novel. This is actually proving to be more surreal than I thought it would be. Dickens World is a pretty bizarre place, with men and women dressed in clothes of the period, swanning around, and some tacky gimmicks like robotic men at every corner. But despite opposition from hardcore Dickensians, the novelist would welcome the theme park, as it generates money in his name, something which everybody in these tough times can resonate with. Next, I came to the Charles Dickens Coffee House in London. Hi, can I get a coffee, please? Yeah, can I have a latte, please, sir? If I could accuse Dickens World of being a bit tacky, then finding a suitable adjective for the Charles Dickens Coffee House is almost impossible. Situated in the middle of Covent Garden, I had great expectations that it would pay homage to Charles Dickens, but with its drab and dreary interior and substandard facilities, it felt more like a prison cell, but with a lick of paint applied to it. The customers also look as miserable as the decor, and it seems as though the Charles Dickens Coffee House is using the great author's name not to educate, but to take advantage of tourists' wallets. The books they provide have pages torn out of them, and most importantly of all, the coffee is pretty poor. Now, when I first came to the Charles Dickens Coffee House, I was expecting a place that would celebrate the work of Dickens and put a modern twist on it. But really, it's got nothing to do with Dickens at all. I mean, apart from a few pictures and books, and any dedicated Dickensian will probably see it as an insult to the great author. It's actually taken Dickens down to the level of a tacky Starbucks. To conclude, the Charles Dickens Coffee House and Dickens World paint a bizarre portrait of how the author is celebrated in modern times. But after 200 years, Charles Dickens' novels still appear to capture the public's imagination, and to end this documentary I've come back to Warwick University to ask Professor John Mee whether Dickens will still be celebrated in the same manner in another 200 years.
I do think so, yeah. I think the writing, I mean, whether or not everybody's going to always wade through those novels, and perhaps he'll be more famous through films of the writing and things, but I think he managed to be somebody who managed to turn his writing into kind of myths that have kind of somehow kind of gained a foothold in our culture and indeed internationally, you know. So the whole thing about please sir, can I have some more, the Fagin thing, the Christmas Carol, people who haven't read the novels or the writing know about that, and I see almost no matter what happens to the writing, I think that may still be the case in 200 years time, and he'll be remembered for those things if for nothing else.
What you are about to receive, may the Lord make you true.